I just want to talk a little bit about choosing a tech stack for your next project. So maybe this is a project at work or a project that you have an idea for, you want to just hack on something in the evenings or whatever. How do you go about choosing which technologies you want to use for that? This came on, I was in this situation just a couple weeks ago. I had a really small website. It was just static HTML, but I wanted to grow it a little bit, and I wanted to redesign it, and I was like, I should choose the new tech stack for this redesign. I was trying to think, okay, should I make it a static site builder? Should I go with like Gatsby? I was thinking of all these things. And I don't know, I was just thinking, how do I go about choosing what I'm going to use? So there's a lot of things you can take into consideration. How scalable your technology is, if there's a high learning curve for a certain technology you want to use, how performant it is, how maintainable it is. This list goes on and on and on. There's like thousands of attributes that you can compare technologies across, and a lot of times it just becomes so overwhelming that it's hard to even balance. You just kind of want to close your eyes and
give up.
Right. It's hard. So really, for me, I kind of reflected back on a lot of the projects I'd been a participant in the past, and it actually just comes down to one factor for me, and that is nonsense, right? My number one requirement for a tech stack is that I don't want to have any nonsense. So I don't know, how many of you have worked on a code base where there was lots of nonsense? Yeah. I think we've all, if we've done a decent amount of web development, you know what nonsense looks like, right? And it could be like, maybe you're chasing some upgrade path, like the library or the framework you're using is like upgrading every month or so, and you have to chase it, otherwise you'll get way behind, and you don't even need any of the new features, but they keep releasing these new features. Maybe you've got all these dependencies, and there's like security issues like going crazy in your dependencies, so you have to, like, it's like putting cards on your board when you're like trying to build features, but like your dependencies are getting in the way. Sometimes it's like the surface area for security issues is just huge because of just how much surface area your project has. That's nonsense. Maybe you're using a whole lot of tech and you're just doing something simple. That's nonsense. That comes back to bite you. Really, anytime I'm doing like constant maintenance on my build or my deployment process, and I know that I just want to be delivering value to the end users, like, that's nonsense. There's a lot of nonsense, but it all comes down to nonsense. And we know what it feels like. And to me, it feels like I can't do my job because I have to keep dealing with problems that shouldn't be problems in the first place. And I know they shouldn't be problems because I've worked on projects where there was no nonsense, right? Maybe think back on a project you've worked on where things just worked, right? Like, that happens too.
That's launch day, right? Relaunch the website. It's perfect.
So how do you go about choosing technologies where things just work? You know, is it just are there just some frameworks that are inherently better than others? You just like choose React and call it a day, and it's like, oh right, yeah, we're good now. There's no more nonsense. Of course not. So what I've found is that avoiding nonsense is less about choosing the best framework, like technology or technical framework, and it's more about making sure the shape of your technology fits the shape of the problem, right? So I've seen projects where MongoDB was excellent and it did great and it made things performant and it was wonderful, and I've seen projects where MongoDB was a big issue and they had to like refactor it out and it took months and months, right? And it's not because MongoDB was inherently great or inherently terrible. It's just it needs to be the right shape for the problem that you're trying to solve. But I mean, this seems really easy. It's like, oh yeah, kid's toy box. Just put the circle in the circle and you're good. But it's a lot more difficult than that, because first we have to accurately know the shape of the technology, which we often don't. And then we also have to accurately know the shape of the problem, which we usually don't either. So it's like we're like trying to play this game with our eyes closed. And so it's easy to get into a place where you're trying to put the square block into the round hole, and you're having all sorts of problems. So, if we just take those two problems, trying to figure out the shape of the problem and then the shape of the technology, and kind of break that down, then it can make things a lot easier. So knowing the shape of the problem, which is like the hole, the shape of the hole, that's knowing the business or the domain that you're working in. And this is something that a lot of developers don't think a lot about. They figure, I've been hired to write code, so I'm here to write code. But actually, as a developer, if you want to make good technical recommendations, you need to understand the business and how it works, right? Like at Sparkbox, people hire us to solve their problems, but we have to understand their business, and we have to do that very quickly because we start running with projects all the time. So it's a matter of understanding, okay, suppose you're working for a business and they sell cars or whatever. You got to understand, what does the process of selling a car look like? Who buys your cars? How long does it take to buy the car? What's the end user's problem? What are their pain points? What are their expectations when they're coming to use the application, right? So it's understanding the business. That's the whole, and that drives the technology, right? So a common mistake is that we have a technology that we want to use, and then we run around looking for a problem to solve with it. But we actually want to go the opposite direction. We need to start with the shape of the problem, and then run around and find the technology that fits that problem best. Okay? If you start with the shape of the technology and then you go searching for a problem, you end up with products like Google Glass and other things where it's the tech is great, but nobody wants to use this thing, right? And so many startups and things have failed because they've got this switched around. So when it comes to knowing the shape of the technology, this is really hard also because a lot of the times you don't know the shape of the technology if you haven't tried the technology before, right? If I haven't used Gatsby, then I don't know if Gatsby is going to be a good fit for a certain project. So you almost have a chicken and egg problem where you wish you need some experience using it to make a good recommendation, but you're not going to just jump in and use it blind because it might fit a problem incorrectly. So that I like to represent that as a spectrum, right? So we have known technologies, which are ones that I've used before. Maybe for me that's Drupal or Ruby on Rails. And then I have unknown technologies that I haven't used before, maybe Flask or Laravel. There's just a couple for me. So I can be conservative and just go with the ones that I know, the ones that I know the shape for. But if you do that for too long, then you start to miss out on all the other shapes that are out there, ones that might be a better fit. Or you can go super risky and just start trying the newest, hottest, coolest frameworks that you can think of, but then there's a pretty good chance that you're going to make some mistakes and that it's not going to fit the problem. So you kind of have to figure out where on the spectrum, where on the risk and conservatism level you want to put yourself to say, okay, I'm going to use a lot of technologies I know, but I'm going to innovate in this one part. Maybe I'm going to use a new build system this time, or maybe I'm going to use a new database this time. But everything else is going to be familiar to me, so you can offset your risk that way. If you look at the most innovative product companies out there, like Tesla and Google X and these amazing companies that are making incredible leaps and bounds in these amazing products, and you find out what technologies they're using, it's often super boring stuff. And I saw this thread that was talking about all the infrastructure that Tesla's using, and it's MySQL databases and Ruby on Rails and Jenkins for their CI builds. And it's they're Teslas. Shouldn't they be inventing these new amazing technologies? But they're not. And that's because they're choosing which layer they want to innovate on. And if they were spending all their time innovating on the lower level tech, then they wouldn't have the resources to innovate on the product that they're giving their end users, right? So we have to do kind of the same thing. We have to decide which layer we want to innovate on. And if we spend all of our time in this risky area, like trying new things and maybe like writing up your own frameworks or whatever you want to do, then there's a chance that you don't have the resources to innovate where it really matters for your clients or your customers. So again, it's just a matter of finding where on the spectrum makes the most sense for you. Obviously, going towards the risky side is an investment because it helps you have better knowledge for making better recommendations in the future. So I don't think it's appropriate to stay all the way on any end of that spectrum.
If I could make comments of the comparison between, say, Tesla and Facebook. Facebook is about providing software as a service. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of tools and frameworks which have spawned out of Facebook because that's what they do. Mm-hmm. Versus the emphasis of the focus of Tesla is on manufacturing cars. Mm-hmm. They're making hardware. So, I mean, I see, like, Andy gives a presentation about his tool that they built. That's because they're working in all day long. So that contrast there is Tesla's focus on what they're supposed to be focusing on, and they're going with MySQL rather than making their own database because they're focused on making cars. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's what you were trying to get across. Yeah.
No, that's a good point. Yeah. Anyways, I don't have much more else to say except that if you want to avoid nonsense, then make sure you're spending time understanding the problem so you know the shape of the problem, and then go to the tech stacks that you know the shape of and find the shape that fits the problem. And if you can do that, and if you can also find opportunities to learn about the other shapes that are out there, that's important too. But that's how you avoid nonsense. And I wish you well in your tech stack choosing quest.
It becomes something that was potentially an option where we've done React, I've done pure native, but the two together
React native,
was the unknown. So like it wasn't completely unknown, but it became exactly what you said, where the pieces fit because while Xamarin was great for whatever, we need to do some custom binding stuff, and in React Native, it's native code, so we can do the binding stuff in Swift and Java and still have that cross-platform code. So it was an interesting case of like, maybe this newer technology that we're not familiar with is actually probably the best fit because it gives us that cross-platform, and we still get our native code, but there is that risk where it's like, well, technically we haven't done any React Native. So we did, like what you said, did an evaluation over a couple of days, and it was like, I think we can make this work, and so, yeah, it was one of those good situations where we had a bunch of decent technologies, but they all kind of fit differently for the particular problem we're working on. So,
yeah. Yeah, great example.
Also, just a comment, I think one of the ways to kind of figure out other technology and opportunities is, number one, come to things like this, right? So you get to
expose, yeah.
And conferences and things like Code Match, they're pre-compilers. And one of the pre-compilers I really loved was 7 languages in 7 hours. Mm-hmm. So basically we spent the day and we did this exercise in 7 different languages throughout the day. And that gave me a feeling for it's like, what is it like to work in these languages?
Yeah.
And it's like, there are opportunities out there if you seek them out.
Yeah, and you don't have to like try one of those new languages with your client's money, right? Because you can evaluate in those kinds of environments.
Plus, I think one thing it does benefit for you is it helps you build up a portfolio. Like if you just do it for a side project, just for fun.
Yeah.
Like, put that in GitHub so that later on when you're going for a job or something, you can show them, hey,
I've done this.
Or I mean, at least it gives you some exposure to different languages. So a lot of times, they don't have a problem with developers switching from one language to another. But if you have even just a tiny bit of experience, that goes a long way. Mm-hmm.